What's happening, everybody? How y'all making out? Got a great guest in drum wonder Bobby Jarzombek. Bobby's been on my list of guys I wanted to speak to ever since I heard Spastic Ink for the first time about 20 years ago, and then many years later, actually seeing video of him playing and the crazy setup and the playing open-handed, the crazy ability to just play all that stuff, to conceive it, to execute it, everything about it. Needless to say, dude is incredible. So check it out and hope y'all enjoy it. While my sponsor, New Orleans Record Press, is open and pressing the hell out of records, check them out at NewOrleansRecordPress.com, by the way. I'd also like to take time to remind the listeners to help out any touring musicians out there that are facing an indefinite hiatus in the form of Bandcamp purchases, merch and or vinyl purchases, etc. And to keep your ears and eyes peeled for venues and restaurants that are very much struggling amidst this complex world in which we find ourselves. Lots of drummers and other musicians giving online lessons as well, so look them up and hit them up if you can. And of course, shout out to all the peaceful protesters taking to the streets demanding change in what is oftentimes a broken system that has turned a deaf ear on the people it supposedly represents and or protects. So power to the fucking people. Crash Bang Boom Podcast can be found on my SoundCloud and YouTube pages, as well as Google Play, Podbean, Stitcher, Luminary, and more. Check out my Facebook and Instagram pages for additional content and or updates, and please give me a like and or a follow, etc. if you could. The support is appreciated. So here we go. Bobby Jarzombek. Dude is one of one, that is for sure. So let's get at it. Crash, bang, boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
Yeah! All right, well, I'm here with the one and only Bobby Jarzombek. I think I pronounced it right, man. I know you're accustomed to probably people butchering your name. Certainly not as common as Smith, but you know, every now and again I can nail a name. It does happen from time to time. How are you doing, buddy?
No, that was good. It was correct. Jarzombek, you got it.
Yeah.
Doing well.
Right on, man. How are you doing, all things considered, and what have you been doing with what I'm assuming is, as a professional musician, some downtime that you've had on your hands? I believe the last time I saw you was with Fates Warning when y'all played St. Vitus maybe 3 years ago or so. Just curious. Wow. Yeah, it's been a minute. Just curious if you've been dealing with any canceled tours or recording sessions, and what you've been doing with what I would imagine is some downtime.
Yeah, I mean, definitely has been some downtime. It was kind of strange. I started on the new Fates Warning records. I came off the Sebastian tour and U.S. tour in 2019. It was sort of early November, I think, and I took a couple of weeks off, or maybe even only 1 week, and I started on the Fates Warning record.
Gotcha.
Learning the songs, listening to, all the programming drums that Jim had and prepared for me, and just sorting things. And I started working on the tunes. And of course, Christmas rolls around, and I had other stuff going on. I play with some local groups around here. I play with a really cool country band with members of George Strait's band.
Nice.
And we had a lot of corporate kind of stuff, and I got busy doing a bunch of stuff. But I was pretty much focused on the Fates Warning record, and for the most part, and working on it just about every day. And then it got to be closer to March already of this year, and I was scheduled to go out with Sebastian kind of mid-March and do a 2-month tour of the U.S. and Canada. And of course, early March is when all this stuff hit.
Right.
And and it was kind of crazy because I told the Fates guys I was probably a little more than halfway in with the stuff learned and recorded. And I told the guys, I said, I'm not going to get this finished before I leave. And I'm going to have to wait until June when I get back. Or it was May, like late May, to continue working on it. And then it was, you know how it is, drums are done first on all this stuff. So
right.
The guys were freaking out because they really wanted the record to come out this year, later in 2020. And if it's going to get pushed back 2 more months of my tracking. So we were trying to figure out all different kind of ways, and it was frustrating, and guys were not happy about it, and I was like, I can't do anything. I got a 2-month tour, and so it was. I was working on tracks, getting ready to leave, and then it all blew up, of course, and I ended up staying home, obviously. And the Sebastian tour got rescheduled now. It is funny because it got rescheduled. It was booked starting in mid-March, and before even the tour was going to start, it was already got rescheduled and rebooked for October, November, December. So that's how it got rescheduled for later in the year. And I was able to take the time and finish the Fates Warning record, which was really cool that I was able to do that. And everybody was, of course, happy about that. But then, as of now, I don't even know if the release date got pushed back with Metal Blade. So there's even a chance of that where, you never know. I mean, I was able to finish the record. It's completely done. It's mixed and everything. It just needs mastering. But who knows if it even got pushed back even further, because, as you know, if we're scheduled for a late 2000, but then they pushing back the March releases in April, May, and it's a snowball effect on releases
totally
coming out.
Yeah.
So I was able to stay pretty busy, and after I got done with the Fates Warning record, I'm able now to kind of just do some home projects and yard stuff, and that's been going good, trying to catch up on all that stuff. And but yeah, I'm anxious to get out there and play again.
I bet, man. You've been at it for a minute. When you said here, are you still in San Antonio, Texas?
Yeah.
Gotcha. And do you have the capability of via a home studio or any of that to be able to track drums like there at your place?
Yes, I do.
Awesome.
And I've been able to do that for a little while. I did Theories of Flight at my place, and I also did the Riot record Inishmore. Oh, no, Inishmore. Immortal Soul. I did that one, and I've done I did this other thing, the Zealer project. With Finn from Denmark. That's an awesome record, and so I've done that. And I even did, like, right when I was sort of getting set up with stuff and starting to buy, some of my own mic pre's and microphones and, my converters and all that stuff. I even did some of the later Halford stuff that was released.
Nice.
Like sort of 2010, I've even done a couple of those things at my place. So
that's awesome.
But mostly it's just the later things that I've done.
Yeah. Is the home studio, is it literally in your house, or is it a separate shed, building, garage, etc.?
Separate building out in the back.
Awesome, man. That is amazing. Very, very cool. Well, I know your brother Ron, who played guitar, obviously, in Watchtower, and of course, the two of you played in Spastic Ink together. Tell me a little bit about the musical household that the two of you. Do you have an additional sibling as well?
Yeah, there's three of us, and I'm the middle kid. Ron is about maybe a year and a half younger, and then Ralph is a year and a half older.
Wow.
So when we were growing up together, we were just basically listening to I'm 56, 57 years old now, so I grew up in the late 70s listening to music, and it was mostly pop hits and the radio stuff, and that's what kind of drew us to music, is just the great songs of that era. And we wanted to learn to play instruments, and so my mom and dad, they bought us a little cheap Casio type organ and a little toy drum set for Christmas. $14 drum set from Sears for Christmas, and that's what we ended up getting. And my brother Ron ended up picking up the little songs on the organ that night, at Christmas night, just with the little songbook that came with the organ, and he started to really get it like right away.
Wow.
And me and Ralph, we didn't really show too much interest in the drums, but initially, but Ron started taking piano lessons, and and he was, like I said, a little younger. And then my mom asked me if I wanted to take drum lessons at that point, and I was like, well, I don't know, I guess. I didn't care one way or the other.
Yeah.
But Ronnie was playing piano already. Well, it was basic piano, and so I started just taking snare drum lessons. And then my mom bought us a piano so he could have a piano and a little bit better drum set that I could start to play on. And we played together. Just, Ron did his little lesson kind of stuff, but then we just kind of like jammed some stuff together. And then when we started listening to more music and when bands we started getting into a little bit hard rock stuff, like bands like Kiss and Rush and Scorpions and stuff like that. We started to really love that music, the heavier music.
Yeah.
And Ron took up the guitar, and then we started playing songs, just me and him together, guitar and drums. And we had these weird medleys where we would put it, like we had this medley that we played that was like probably 10 minutes long, and it had everything in it had like 15 seconds of a bunch of songs I remember, and there was Boston, More Than a Feeling. There was
nice.
Uriah Heep song was in there.
Cool.
You Really Got Me. I'm going to have to think about it. I have to ask Ron if he remembers how many songs were in this little medley. But we did stuff like that. We played together and whatever. Then my older brother Ralph saw that we were playing together, and we said, well, we need a bass player. And so he started taking up the bass. And then we played through our high school years. We did like parties and high school kind of stuff, talent shows. And then we started playing clubs around town when we were in high school and just getting out of high school. So we kind of had a little trio together for a little while, and then we added another guitar player, and we were playing around town, and we did that for a little while until, my older brother went to college and things changed, and joining other bands and stuff. But that's how we got started.
Wow.
And learning to play and listening to the music we loved.
Wow. Well, I mean, how old were you when you got your first drum set then?
I was 10 when I got the little toy drum set, the little Sears thing at Christmas, until I started taking my snare drum lessons. But I think it was shortly after that where I got just a little kick drum, snare drum, mounted tom cymbal thing. And then eventually, like maybe a year later, I got a floor tom added to that. And then I think I was probably like 14 maybe when I got my first Ludwig kit.
Nice.
And it was a Vista-like kit. And that was the first, I would say, kind of pro kit where it actually had two cymbals, a hi-hat, and a 5-piece kit. And that's when we were playing, as I mentioned, playing gigs around town and stuff. That's what I used. And I used that kit for years. I even used pieces of that kit up until 86 when I was playing with Juggernaut.
Wow.
87 maybe. Yeah, it was that same kit for a while. Yeah.
Do you still have it?
I have pieces of it, but it was that clear Vistalite.
Yep.
And I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I have one.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I got one from the early 70s. Yeah.
Wow. I started to hate it after a while, the Vistalite. It annoyed me. I mean, now you see guys like Thomas Lang and Portnoy has one and whatever.
Yeah, but those are the new ones. The new acrylic kits are a completely different thing than the old ones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, these drums, the floor tom was so out of round.
Oh, totally.
I mean, it was like, and the bearing edge on it was awful.
Oh,
on
absolutely.
a couple of the drums.
Yep.
Yeah.
I absolutely know it.
You couldn't even tune the drums right. And anyway, I'm not cutting down on Ludwig or whatever, but those early Vistalite kits, some of them were horrible.
Yeah.
And so I got tired of looking at the kit. And so a few years later, when I was adding pieces and getting some wood drums, I used a couple of those drums, and I painted them blue with Krylon spray paint right over the Vistalite, just boom, right over the top of it with blue spray paint.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
Oh, my God.
yeah, it was awful. It was just awful. But I just got so tired of looking at the clear for so many years
Right.
that I just painted them.
That's amazing. Well, you mentioned, oh, no, go
I
ahead.
don't have them anymore, by the way. Yeah, I don't.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, along the way, man, were there any particular teachers that you came across that were a pretty major influence on how you would play then and or over the course of your career?
Well, that first teacher that I had when I started playing, he was a good rudimental teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even remember his name.
Oh,
Local
damn.
San Antonio teacher. Yeah, and then I had a couple of other teachers that I guess I really didn't care for, or I don't really recall anything cool or educational about what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started, and I learned how to read just a little bit, but then I got into school band, and when I started in school band, I was reading snare drum music, and I started to buy drum set books, sheet music, books, and there's been a bunch of books that I really liked that I started to buy some basic stuff like the Carmine Appice book and all those kind of books. But then there were other books. There was a book by David Garibaldi, Future Sounds. That was later, obviously.
Uh-huh.
That's an amazing book.
You know, it's interesting. In listening to your drumming, there were some hi-hat, sort of linear hi-hat grooves that I thought, I wonder if at all he was ever into David Garibaldi. And I kind of have a sense of it because he's one of my favorite drummers, and from one of his instructional VHS tapes was like, I think it was Tower of Groove or whatever. That was, if I had to point to a single VHS tape, that was a major influence on me to this day. It's absolutely that, and his playing in particular. And I swear I'm not lying. I was going to ask you if he was an influence. That's interesting that you mentioned his book.
Yeah, I mean, the hi-hat lift kind of thing, the little, whether you're doing an 8th note or a 16th note lift, or whether you're placing it on the 1 or the E or the or the and, and it's just, it adds so much color to music, to drumming, and it's a complete lost art within the drummers today, metal drummers and... I mean, of course, with death metal drummers and all that other stuff, it's completely lost, and I don't get it. I don't understand it at all. It's like, I mean, it's like, I mean, I did a country gig one time, and locally, and I left my hi-hat stand at home by accident, and I didn't know what to do, and I took one of my cymbal stands and I closed. And I put my hi-hat cymbals together and just just had them shut the whole time, like completely shut. It was the worst. It was the worst gig. I couldn't believe how. I mean, there wasn't one song that I played that I felt comfortable.
Right.
I mean, not one. So anyway, getting back to the David Garibaldi, that was a great book.
Yeah.
There was even another book called The Fusion Drummer. I forget who wrote that book. But I've gone through all of those books, like the Joe Rothman books. I've gone through a lot of those. But that's what I started doing. Is I started buying books, and that's how I learned to translate the snare drum music. Easily enough, it's the snare drum on the C line, and then you just see the kick drum underneath it, and then the hi-hat and all the toms in between. And I mean, it's easy enough once you learn how to read snare drum to read the rest of the kit. And I did that instantly, and I got so used to doing it that way, and writing music too. When I learn a song or whatever, whether it's some kind of cover song, or if it's even a song that I'm recording that I wrote, that, like, for instance, this new Fates Warning record, all the songs are charted out completely, because it makes it that much easier for me to look at the music and read it while I'm playing, and it actually clears up some things for me. If I'm thinking, like, are there ghost notes on this part? Where can I add ghost notes? Where do they need to be sort of kind of placed? And stuff like that. It really, I mean, reading music and the way I did it from the books I bought and the approach I use. It definitely, works for me.
Right. Well, out of curiosity, I mean, we're kind of talking about academia or just, studying with people and whatnot. But out of curiosity, were you good in school? Did you enjoy being in school? And I only ask because when I think about your drumming and the sort of level of meticulousness and or the creative spirit that you have, sometimes that doesn't transfer into the classroom or academic settings. So I just like to ask drummers that sometimes. So I guess for you, were you good in school? Did you enjoy school?
I mean, it was okay. I don't think it was. I don't think I hated it or loved it. It was just a necessity, I think, of course.
Yeah.
But I remember I went to a Catholic high school, and actually all my 12 years of school were at a Catholic school, and two different schools. But I remember when, and my graduating class was 81 people, I think.
Wow.
Or something like that as my graduating class. And I still remember when it was kind of 6 months into the senior year, and they kind of told us where we ranked our grade based upon our grades. They gave us, basically they let everybody know of our standings and how we fell between 1 and 81. And I remember I was 19th, out of 81. And I remember, I don't know why I even remember this. It's stupid. This is so many years ago, 30-something years ago or whatever.
Right.
And I don't know why I remember that, but I remember that I was 19th, and I remember that all my friends were shocked that I was 19th, and I was too, and I don't know why I was. I guess I got a lot of ABs my senior year. I don't know. But
right.
I never was really that crazy about school. It was just a necessity.
Yeah.
But I don't think that, the thing about the musical thing or between me and Ron and I think it's kind of I don't know where that comes from, the sort of analytical approach.
Mm-hmm.
Ron never went to, college for music either or anything.
That's amazing. Wow.
No, I mean, not at all.
Wow.
And, it's kind of a self-study thing.
Mm-hmm.
My dad is a really sort of hard worker, and he puts his mind to something, and he works really hard at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we sort of adapted that mentality when it came to music. You got to really work hard at something. You got to work long hours, that sort of thing. And my mom was sort of, it's hard to say, but she was a pretty talented cake decorator, and
yeah.
And she just, I guess she had more the artistic sort of things, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad was the diligent, and my mom was the other side. And I don't know where it comes from as far as, I know that people have said that, and that's a big compliment when people say stuff about me and Ron playing, and
yeah.
the way our brains work and all that kind of stuff. But
yeah, totally.
I don't know how to even explain it other than that.
That's wild.
I really don't.
Wow. Well, speaking of your brother Ron, I know that he is or was in a Rush tribute band, and I can only assume that I would imagine Neil Peart, rest in peace, of course, was an influence to you. But outside of Neil Peart, potentially, were there any other major drum influences? I like to call them the unshakable influences that you feel might still be inherent in your playing, even still to this day.
Definitely Neil Peart was number one for sure.
Yeah.
By far, he was number one. Just as the whole approach of the way he approached the drum kit, where, you can tell somebody's playing. I can tell somebody's playing, by the type of drummers that they like. If they're really improvisational, if their drumming is really structured in that.
Mm-hmm. And
most drummers that are structured come from the Neil sort of school of drumming.
Right.
So, it's real important because without a guy like that, I don't know, my drumming probably would have been somewhat different. Mm-hmm. He was that big of an influence on me.
Wow.
And from early on, that was other than, listening to old, like I said, 70s records of bands like Three Dog Night, Rare Earth, and stuff like that, where I was interested in the drummers, but mm-hmm. Neil was the guy, a real drummer that opened my eyes to what could be done on the drum kit.
Wow.
But then Terry Bozzio has always been a really big influence. Simon Phillips was huge early on. And then there were all the others, Bill Bruford, Steve Smith, Mark Craney. There's a whole bunch of other guys that kind of fell all in there. And then it wasn't until like the 80s, later 80s, when I heard Dean Castronovo, and it totally blew my mind. I had the Tony McAlpine and the Wild Dogs records that he did, and I charted out those songs and played along with him. At that time, 86 or so, and those records, that Wild Dogs Reign of Terror, that record is still one of the greatest drumming records, Dean Castronovo. And then, I don't know if you know that record.
No, but I'm glad you mentioned it. I will most certainly have to check it out.
Yeah, it's insane. Still today, it's insane to me.
That's awesome.
And then, then later, just listening to a lot of guys, and then even like Dirk, who's with Megadeth now, but the work he did with Soilwork, amazing drumming. So there's been guys later, that I've been influenced by, but or that are exciting for me. Gavin Harrison, there's a lot of guys now. There's tons of guys, but those were the first early influences,
That's awesome, man. I will definitely have to check out that record. You mentioned Simon Phillips earlier, which was one of my questions in you being an open-handed player, which I think is so crucial, especially when you get down to the Spastic Ink stuff, because of you being able to keep time and then having that free right hand to be playing sort of these melodies almost and just be able to orchestrate all that stuff. So I guess, did you start out playing open-handed, or was that a product of seeing Billy Cobham or Simon Phillips?
No, I started right-handed, the sort of traditional way of playing drum set. I've always done a couple of things left-handed. Like I throw a frisbee left-handed. I bounce a basketball, and that was all important to me when I was a young kid playing sports before I really decided I was either going to go sports or music. But I was always, completely or mostly right-handed, except for those few things. And I chop wood if I'm doing that left-handed. I do a few things that way. Yeah, I don't know why. They seem more natural that way. But there was a time when I was working on the second Riot record, Privilege of Power, and there was a song called Storming the Gates of Hell, and there was a pattern I wanted to play, and I wanted to play kind of with my right hand going around the toms and playing still time on the left on the hi-hat. And I remember I couldn't do it with my hands crossed over, so I learned that one part just to keep time with my left hand and to play the pattern that I was hearing in my head with my right hand around the toms. And I just said to myself at that time, right around there, 89 or 90, I said, I'm going to do this. And Simon was a huge influence, not so much the Cobham's, influence, but I love Billy Cobham's playing, but because Simon did it, and I watched, I'd seen him on videos and stuff, and I loved his playing so much. I thought, I'm going to do this. And so every day when I was practicing hours and hours a day, I would sit down at the drum kit, and then I would play open-handed, and I set my ride that way, and I set my hi-hat lower, and I practiced that way. Then I would go into like local gigs, or if I was playing with Riot at the time, I'd play, traditional with the crossover kind of thing, and then I would go back and forth. But every day I'd practice open-handed, and so every new thing I learned open-handed, and so I did that for a couple of years, and then I learned the whole Riot set. I remember to play it open-handed and move the ride to the left, and then I did that on tour or whatever when I was playing with Riot, and so it took a long time actually to to totally get switched over. I don't know how many years. It probably took 10 years.
Wow.
Or longer to get where I felt every single thing more comfortable left-handed. And I even find myself, there's a couple of things, if I'm playing, I mean, it's kind of hard to describe, but if I'm playing like a train beat, if I'm doing like a country gig or whatever, which I do a lot, if I'm playing a train beat, I play that right-handed. Like I'll reach over with my right hand, go to the right on my left, and play my right hand on the left, on my right, and then I'll do like the 16th notes with my left hand on the snare. It's like, so that thing I still do. That's one thing I still do that's a crossover, but most every single thing, else. And I mean, I couldn't even play some of the stuff that I do with Fate's Warning if I played, with my hands crossed.
Right.
There's no way that you play those parts. It's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, same for watching, some of the stuff that was ultimately on your VHS tape. When I watched that, I mean, it'd be nearly impossible, I feel like, to play that, and especially with the Spastic Ink stuff, which we'll talk about. That's so rapid fire, and there's the orchestrations are happening so split second that I think the open-handed thing serves you in those instances.
Sure.
Yeah,
definitely. I don't even think about it. I mean, when I'm, I'm constructing a part for a song or whatever, I mean, I don't have to think about the fact that one hand is crossed over or how am I going to make this happen, because it's not,
Right, exactly. I hear you, man. Well, I was looking at your discography, and you just mentioned Riot, obviously. So I guess in '88, I believe you did Thundersteel with them. And I know the original guitarist, Mark, is it Real or Real? How do you pronounce his name?
Mark Reale.
Mark Reale. Gotcha. He had moved down to Texas from New York, where Riot was originally from, and where Riot was putting records out starting, in the late 70s. And I've also spoken to drummer Dave McLean, formerly of Machine Head and presently with Sacred Reich, who's from San Antonio, about the 80s. But I'd like to hear a little bit about your experience in that time, what San Antonio was like, and then I guess how you joined Riot, who, upon regrouping with you in the band, went from formerly a more classic rock style to more of a power metal band. So tell me a little bit about, I guess, the late 80s and joining Riot.
Do you know anything about San Antonio and that whole scene, or
from speaking to Dave McLean, he told me a lot about it.
Yeah, he's pretty proud of, I guess, the scene. It's just growing up here as I am. I don't want to go. I know he probably talked about it a lot, and I don't want to kind of drive it into the ground or whatever. But it was really important growing up in San Antonio, just because of the music scene and the DJs and what they were playing on the radio. In the late 70s, you would hear like a whole side of a record.
That's
the whole
cool.
Side of Sad Wings of Destiny. They would just play it. And we used to always joke like the DJ would, had to use the toilet or something, and that's why he left it and played the whole first side or something. But they would do that, and they'd play UFO and Budgie and Angel and, all this stuff. And then when it got to be Accept and Raven and, Saxon, Angel Witch, all these bands got played on FM radio, and we were exposed to all that. And so we had a really great local scene in San Antonio with the bands. And at that point, Dave and Don Van Stavern were in a band, Seance, and then they went to a band, the Essay Slayer. It was just Slayer back then, but people know them now, I guess, as Essay Slayer.
Right.
But and at that point, everybody was playing, a few songs that they loved, from whoever it was, Iron Maiden, Accept, as I mentioned, UFO and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of local bands, but everybody also, all these bands, whether these local bands were playing covers, they were also playing originals. So you would have a band play 75% of their music was originals, but then they would pay sort of a tribute to the bands, that they loved or whatever.
Wow.
And bands were getting signed at that time. Obviously, there was the scenes that were happening in the Bay Area with Metallica and all that whole thing with those bands, and then New York with Anthrax and all those bands, and then different pockets or whatever. But San Antonio, I mean, it was a little bit smaller pocket, but we did have bands that were musicians and bands thinking that they could get a record deal, because bands were popping up all over the place,
Wow.
and new bands. So that's one of the reasons we were all doing original music. And Don was with my brother, was in the band Slayer, S.A. Slayer, and Dave.
Right.
And then at that point, I wanted to join a band and do that same thing, so I joined the band Juggernaut. And Juggernaut ended up getting a record deal with Metal Blade, and those were the first two records I played on in '86 and '87 with that band. And it was cool music. It was different. It wasn't the most technical music, but it was cool, and the band had an image. And having those two albums was a great thing. At that point, Mark Reale knew the whole impact of San Antonio, and Riot was one of those bands that was huge in San Antonio. So when Riot came, and there was, like I was saying, there's certain bands that were nobody anywhere else, like Helix, Budgie, Angel to a certain extent, a lot of Legs Diamond, but Riot was another one of those bands that was huge in San Antonio. So Mark sort of adapted San Antonio as a second home. And when he did that, that's when he and Don and Dave started playing together, and they formed Narita with Steve Cooper, and that was kind of an offshoot of Riot. So when that kind of was over and Mark was reforming Riot, they were looking for a drummer, and Dave was already, I think he was doing Sacred Reich at that time, and Don mentioned my name, and the producers up in New York were like, well, we don't know who this guy is or whatever. And it just so happened that Don had a copy of the Juggernaut records, or at least one of them or something, and played it for the producer. And they said, well, this guy can play or whatever. And they flew me to New York, and I did I did half of the Thunder Steel record. I didn't do the first 4 songs because that was with Mark Edwards, but things didn't work out with him for some reason, and that's why I called in to do the last 5 songs of the Thunder Steel record.
Wow.
And at that time, I vaguely knew Mark from coming around and being in San Antonio, but I really didn't know him. I knew Don really well through my brother and Slayer and seeing him play around town.
Wow.
And but yeah, that's sort of the San Antonio connection to Riot.
Wow, that is so cool, man. All right, well, hell, I got to ask you about Spastic Ink, because I have an interesting story about the first time. Tell me about it. You're the one that played on it.
Yeah.
This shit's incredible, man. It's outrageous. But I personally recall exactly when I first heard it, and I was convinced when my buddy played it for me that it was some sort of computer.
It's a drum machine.
Totally. I was like, man, this shit isn't real. And my drummer buddy said, no, man, I'm telling you, it's this guy, Bobby Jarzombek, by the way, shout out to Sims Chadwick, my drummer buddy who played me that. But he convinced me otherwise. But what's amazing about that material, man, and from bands in like 99 up till recent, with the Dillinger Escape Plan and some of the sort of mathcore and different sort of heavy mathy bands that happen, there's been a lot of extreme music that has transpired in the last 20 plus years. But I gotta say, man, listening to that Spastic Ink record that came out in '97, I mean, it's every bit as like outrageous, in my opinion, as anything that I've heard since then, So I guess maybe tell me a little bit about the formation of that band with you and your brother and the process of writing and recording the material.
Yeah, that was '97 when it came out, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm sure we started working on that record maybe 2 years before.
Wow.
Ryan had he had a problem with his hands, with his fingers. I don't know if you know about that.
No.
He had a problem with his with his pinky and his ring finger on his left hand, where he wasn't able to have control over that. It's a weird sort of thing. It's a little hereditary thing. so he wasn't able to play for a little while, and it was crazy. I felt really bad for him at that point, and because I was doing stuff with Riot and everything else, and he wasn't able to really do that much. But for some reason, he went and did like 4 or 5 surgeries, and one of them finally worked towards the end of that, and he was able to gain function. You have to do an interview with him and ask him about this sometime.
Absolutely.
But when he was able to really play again, we talked about doing something crazy at that time, and that's when we started, having these ideas to put together some music. And the last song on the record was called "The Mosquito Brain Surgery" on that first record. Mm-hmm. And I remember we were thinking, like, well, it's going to be crazy music, of course, because we have a couple of things that we did early, just me and him, a project called Happy Kitties. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
We did 4 songs. Yeah, this was kind of later 80s, maybe.
Wow.
And it's not as crazy, of course, as Spastic Ink, but you can hear the influence on those 4 songs.
Wow.
And so when we did the Spastic Ink stuff, we were like, well, it's gonna be pretty out, And
right.
So we knew that. So we started working on a couple of parts and at that point, Ronnie was living at home at my dad's, but I was still there a lot, practicing and working on stuff. We had a few ideas for that song, and he would write some music out and then give me a cassette of like a little part, like 30 seconds of something. Mm-hmm. And then I would record something on a cassette and then go back in the house and give it to him and whatever. And we would do this back and forth. And we thought initially when we started working on that song, well, maybe we can get like a couple of minutes worth of music. And then that song ended up being like an 8-9 minute song or something,
Wow.
And it was like, well, we can create a lot of music, It was pretty strange, that we could do that right away. And Ron has these crazy concepts, of, a song with only 2 notes, using octaves and harmonics, and then the Bambi thing, the thumper impersonation, and
right.
Just all this. I mean, some of it kind of blew my mind because I didn't know it was going to get that crazy, but I just think the time of sitting down with it and then sorting out the parts. And it's funny when you're doing that, you don't realize some of the stuff is as complicated as when you're doing it.
Wow.
And then you step away from it like a little later, whether it's even a few days or a month later, and then you listen to it and you're like, God, that's some crazy shit,
Yeah, yes, it was.
It's kind of like that, but we just tried to push the boundaries, and we had sort of crazy influences that we would say. And I know guys like Mike Portnoy and does it. He does this a lot when he'll say, "This is the Kansas part," or "This is the Yes part of the song," or or whatever. But we did that a little bit, where I can tell you that there were certain sections of each song where, like he would say, do like a free will kind of thing, but make it instead of in 4, make it like in 6/8, or like it was that sort of thing. And we took those influences and did something a little further out with that.
Amazing.
A lot of UK influence too. I need to mention that.
A lot of what?
UK, the band UK.
Okay.
Terry Bozzio or Bill Bruford was the first drummer, and then Terry Bozzio was the second drummer on those records.
Wow.
That's one of our favorites that we used a lot of examples for when we were working on that stuff. And then we brought Peart in, of course, to play bass. Mm-hmm. And we've known Peart since we were sort of still in high school or just getting out of high school, playing in one of those local San Antonio bands. And Pete's an awesome bass player, amazing bass player. He was then, and he still is.
Wow. Well, I guess other than, when I think about sort of heavier music and the tech heavy side of it, at least somebody like Sean Reinert kind of comes to mind, between, I guess, 91's Death Human and Cynic's Focus from 93, and maybe some of the subsequent
Sure.
Death records with Gene Hoglan on them. But were there any other sort of techie, sort of quirky bands that you felt were contemporaries when y'all put that record out? Or even preceded you? I know you just mentioned the Terry Bozzio and Bill Bruford on the UK stuff. I'm just curious if some of those techier drummers, like the Sean Reinert that I mentioned, if maybe those were at all influences.
I didn't know of his playing and Gene's playing until later.
Wow.
It's kind of weird because they came out sort of at the same time, but or maybe even before.
Yeah.
The only real other influence was with Kaluka from Watchtower.
Yeah, that guy's killer.
Yeah, he's definitely more of a improvisational drummer than I am, but his parts and the stuff he came up with was pretty inspirational. And that's the only other drummer besides, like I said, Neil and Simon Phillips and Terry Bozzio. Rick was probably the only one. I mean, I heard like the Human record a little later, and I thought it was, amazing, of course.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that Gene did also with Death.
Right.
But I didn't really hear that early for some reason. I don't know why.
Interesting. Well, one of my fellow drummer buddies, Angel Cote, he had a question he wanted me to ask you about a specific song, and I believe it's the first song off that first record.
Oh, good.
The Mad Data Race. He wanted me to ask you how you did the open-close hi-hat work that you do while maintaining the double bass patterns that you did on that song.
There's two hi-hats on that song, and you can tell by one of them just doesn't sound too good. The closed hi-hat doesn't sound that great. They're placed, it's sort of the configuration was, I was open-handed on that stuff where the hi-hat is closed. I mean, the open hi-hat is my regular hi-hat, and then right above it and kind of a little bit further away from me was the closed hi-hat, and then the right is above that. So it's kind of like the three. So I played a lot of the closed hi-hat there with my left hand, and then if I did something where it was the, having to use my foot and go back and forth, I would use the regular hi-hat. Wow. I'd have to listen to the specific part that he's talking about.
Yeah.
I wish I had videotape of that. Like, I mean, obviously, I didn't even own. Did I own? No. No. I did not own a video recorder at that time.
Right.
When we did that first Spastic Ink, and that's why I put the second one when I did the 4 or 5 songs on Incompatible. I put those out on the net so people could see me play those songs.
Right. Crazy.
And that I did that because I wanted to show people that I was playing, I guess, the parts. Because
right.
I did have a couple of guys saying, "Oh, I figured out how you did that," or something. You overdubbed it, and I was like, "No, I didn't." And it's funny because that record, the first record, we did that on 4-track.
Wow.
Incomplete. We did that on 4-track. And Ron, I didn't even know really how to work the 4-track. He literally sat in front of me and was punching me in, with it. And then there was no such thing as punching out parts. So right. I didn't play the songs from front to back. I didn't. But I would start playing, and I knew the songs for sure. But then I would get like a minute into the song, and then I would screw something up, and he'd say, "Well, let's take it from, a little bit back." And then I would take it from there until I got the whole song done. But I knew the songs really, really well. It's just the parts were so difficult.
Totally.
But I'd have to know what part he was talking about on Mad Data Race. That's one of those songs, by the way, where I had a lot of the parts, like the whole opening sort of that figure in 5 with the, in and then the tom, the patterns between the kick, the hands and the feet that were kind of grouped into 5. Those are a lot of things that I wrote first and gave it to Ron, and then Ron came up with the guitar parts around the drum parts.
Wow.
Or some songs were different. Like, there was a lot of songs, I think, that were back and forth, where I came up with some of the drum parts first, and then he wrote to the drum parts.
Sure.
But that one, I remember there were definitely particular things about that song where I wrote the drums first.
Right.
And the other one was the 178 thing. Yeah, that was another one.
Wow, that is crazy. But I mean, so was that not a frustrating, like, was it super challenging recording that shit?
I don't know. I think anytime that you're at your house and you're able to do stuff, it's a lot easier and a lot less stressful than going into a studio and having to do it.
For sure.
So, yeah. But I don't think it was stressful. I think we were just trying to, get it on tape,
Wow, man. Well, tell me a little bit about, I guess, this VHS DVD performance and technique that you put out in 2003. Just prepping some of that. In particular, and I don't know if you've seen it or not, but on YouTube, they got the guy who does the jazz drummer reacts to, like, metal guys playing some pretty wild stuff. I got to say, man, I enjoyed his reaction to you playing Peppered Cancer or whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty damn funny, and he was baffled at the tail end of that, which was hilarious, I thought.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I look at those songs now. I mean, of course, I love those songs that I did on that, the 3 songs. I did the DVD because I had gotten off the road. I had done Resurrection with Halford, and we were doing, like, pre-production for Crucible. And I remember at that time I thought, man, I sort of have a name now. Like, people know who I am and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do something really cool. I mean, the Halford stuff was great, but it was straight up metal drumming. And at that point, I guess I had come off the Spastic Ink thing a few years prior, and I wanted to do something really crazy.
Right.
So I put together those songs, and those songs, I did those songs straight up, all the drumming. Like, I had all the parts figured out. And then Ron wrote that song, Peppered Cancer, and School around the drumming. And, he came up with a few different options or whatever, and then I was the one who called the shots. And, like, instead of saying, where the guitar player says to the drummer, like, I hate what you're doing there or whatever, I could say, hey, I hate what you're doing there on that part.
That's hilarious.
But I didn't say that. But but he was able to put together those songs, and then I had some friends of mine do the song, the one that's So It Ain't, or a little more Latin sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I put that stuff together. I sort of modeled that out after VHS drumming things. I would go into a music store, and I would see Jeff Porcaro, like, every time you went into a drum shop, there'd be Jeff Porcaro's video, and then you'd see a Buddy Rich sort of thing, and then you see, Dave Weckl.
Dave Weckl, yeah, totally.
Yeah, and Dennis Chambers, but you saw the same 15 videos, Greg this and that, Terry Bowes, same one. And I thought, man, if I put a drum video out, and I said, I sort of have a name now, I can put it in the stores. So I did that, and I put the format together, just as short as all those that were coming out, which were like 50 minutes. And right then, it sort of changed from VHS to DVD. I sent those VHS I sent those out. I printed up like 100 of them after I did that. And after I recorded those songs and those little lessons and that sort of thing, and I sent it out to the guitar centers, and I just called the drum department at guitar centers and said, I'm going to send you VHS I'm working on. If I do, will you play it in your store? And the guys would say, yeah, we'll play it if we have it, if we get it, and that sort of thing. And I made a lot of friends at that time, some friends that I still have today.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say, yeah, we'll play it. So I did the whole thing, and I sent them these copies, and then they were playing it in the stores, and I had people all over the place calling me saying, this is great, where can I buy this? And I sent one copy to everybody,
Right.
And so people wanted to buy it, and at that point, somebody told me, I think it was my friend Mark Petrocelli, was telling me, you need to call, somebody at Warner Brothers and Florida or whatever. And so I did. I got a number, and I called the guy, and I said, yeah, I'm Bobby Jarzombek. I have this VHS Performance and Technique. And he said, yeah, we've been hearing about that. He said, how can we get that on Warner Brothers? And I was floored,
Wow.
And I was like, well, I can, I'll send it to you, the master or whatever, and we can work out a deal. And he says, well, it's all VHS. It's all DVD now. So if you could add some bonus material, the program, whatever, and then we'll put it out.
Wow.
So I did, and I spent another year putting together the bonus stuff just to add little extra things to it. And so I put that out, and they released it, and it was kind of an official release on Warner Brothers, and then it changed to Alfred Publishing shortly after that.
Mm-hmm.
And today, that stuff is on, it's still on YouTube all over the place, and it's one of those things where I think it's some of the things that people only know me for.
Right.
Is that VHS, that old, 2003 VHS. But today, still, it's the smartest thing, I think, the best thing that I've ever done, as far as for my own sort of career. It's, sure, I didn't have a part in, playing on Rob Halford's record. I didn't create that. This is something that I totally created from scratch.
Right.
But it was the smartest thing that I've ever done.
Wow.
So getting to the jazz drummer thing that you're talking about, jazz drummer reacts to.
Yeah.
So, I get a hit. Somebody posts something on my YouTube channel or something.
Right.
I can see what somebody posts or whatever. Obviously, like everybody does.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a bunch of comments all of a sudden, after, maybe a week or two, I didn't get any, and then I'm getting 10 or 20 a day, and I'm like, where the hell is this coming from, and I don't even know. And then a buddy of mine sends me jazz drummer reacts to, and there's this guy, and he's kind of checking out my drum, and he's going, wow, he's got cymbals behind him. Wow, he's got cymbals behind him. He's hitting them. He's hitting the cymbals behind him.
Yeah.
And, it's pretty lame, actually. It's okay.
Right.
But the guy is bobbing his head, and he's way off the beat.
Right.
He's the song. It's in 4/4 at certain parts of it.
Wow.
But it's in weird groupings. There's some odd time signatures in different parts, but there's a lot of 4/4 in it. It's the way the groupings are, and the guy's bobbing his head way out of time, and I'm like, well, whatever. If people like it and they think it's cool, my wife even watches those people react to videos where she thinks they're cool, or whatever, and I'm like, well, if it gets me more hits, I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah, totally, man. Well, one of the interesting things about you putting out the VHS tape, and hence your point about it being a great decision to do it, I think, is that it puts you in the discussion of what would ultimately become sort of this more technical, heavier side of drumming, and that I think that, you can be pointed as to one of the people that are kind of, I think, one of the main influential people in it, and certainly I would imagine one of the first people to put out an instructional video with, at times, such extreme drumming. Is that something that you would all think about?
Wow. I've never even thought about it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's flattering, of course.
Yeah.
I think that the early Terry Bozzio's ones where he was doing the ostinatos and that sort of thing.
Right.
those were pretty cool. I mean, those were pretty technical. Maybe they're not as aggressive. Maybe
That's
the
the
music isn't
distinction that I'm making. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Oh, man. Well, you know what? Dean Castronovo's High Performance Drumming. Have you seen that one?
I haven't. No.
That one's great. That
Okay.
was probably before me,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really good. It's definitely got Dean's attitude and his craziness in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But there's some great drumming in that, and that was VHS also.
Right.
I mean, the thing is there was a lot of them at that time that were blowing me away.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing Dave Weckl, the First Step. Is that what it was called?
I think so. Yeah.
The first one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that one. I mean, that music was crazy on that.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, that's cool that you say that, man. I never really thought of it that way, as far as heavy drumming.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the timing of it is especially interesting because, I mean, you mentioned some other guys, but again, the distinction that I would make for what you're doing is that you were quite possibly the first to do it in the heavier techie, heavier sort of sense of playing. So once again, that's an amazing decision for you to put that out, and I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
As you mentioned earlier, of course, the jazz drummer actually was talking about you hitting the cymbals behind your head. I'm just curious, how long did the cymbals behind your head precede you doing that video? How long had you been doing that?
I started doing that in '91, maybe.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's a crazy story. I'll try not to make it too long, but I had a friend of mine, Billy White, who was a guitar player with the band Dokken. He was the first guitar player with Watchtower before my brother.
Okay.
And me and him worked on some stuff together, writing some songs, and this is right before I joined Riot. I was kind of looking for something kind of cool to do, a little more technical than, Juggernaut and the other stuff I was doing, and he was a great guitar player. I joined Riot, and he got the gig with Dokken, and I actually auditioned for that gig at that time, Don Dokken's solo band. I didn't get the gig.
Wow.
It's the only gig in my life that I've ever auditioned for and didn't get.
Wow.
I don't know if I wanted it or really, but anyway. But Billy they were auditioning drummers, and he told me about a drummer that came in that he said, it was weird. The guy didn't have enough time to set up or something, but every time he hit a cymbal, it was like it was behind him. And I was like, what? And he says, well, I don't know if it was behind him, but the guy would play like a fill around the kit, and he'd have to reach way back and hit the cymbal behind him. And I was like, that sounds pretty crazy. And so he told me about this, and this is 91, somewhere around there.
Uh-huh.
And so at that point, I got off the phone, and I went into my practice room, and I put a cymbal behind me on my right side and played a fill and hit it. And I was like, well, that's pretty easy. It didn't seem like a big deal.
Yeah.
But I thought it was kind of cool. And so I set up a left one, identical sort of to the right one, and I thought I'll try it left-handed. And it was weird because the way, if you're playing open-handed, which I was at that time, the left hand needs to come up higher sort of to do that. And so I set up the one that's on my left a little higher, a little more tilt to it. And so then I started playing and doing it that way. And I just, and at that point I was starting to do all the stick twirling sort of weird, like,
Yeah.
it's one of those other things too. I never thought I was going to do stick twirling, but because guys like Tommy Lee were doing it and all
Totally.
that. And I thought I might as well. Everybody else is doing it. People like it. They think it's cool. They think it's flashy or whatever. And I started doing it. But I said, well, I'll take it up to another level if I'm doing this stuff with the cymbals behind me. And I worked out all these patterns and that sort of thing. So it kind of came from that, where I was starting to do the cymbals behind me. It was, there's videotape of me playing in Japan in '91 with Riot, and I have the cymbals behind me at that time.
Wow. That's crazy.
I think it's '91.
So a long ass time.
Yeah, I was already doing it for a long time at that point. And
Wow.
like if I do a festival somewhere, or like it's a one-off, and I'm doing a fly-in with Sebastian or something, and I start setting up the cymbal, like I'm setting up a kit from scratch or whatever, and I set the cymbals up behind me, and I got some good old boys sitting inside of the stage watching me do this, and they're thinking, what the hell is he doing over there? He's setting up cymbals behind him.
Right.
It's like, there you go. Yeah. It's like I've been doing that for 30 years. I mean, it's like it's just like old news to me. But
Right.
I don't know. I still do it.
Wow.
I don't do it with Satan, obviously, but music doesn't call for it. It's not a power metal kind of thing.
Right.
But I did it with Halford. I do it with Sebastian, and obviously on my DVD and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, you just mentioned obviously Rob Halford and Sebastian Bach. Tell me a little bit about just working with both of those guys who are such incredible vocalists, and especially earlier you mentioned Sad Wings of Destiny and hearing it on the radio and this and that and the other. So I imagine Rob Halford, working with him, must be a pretty trippy and nostalgic experience.
Yeah, I mean, of course. Like I said, if anybody told me that I was going to be playing with Rob Halford at some point in my life, I would have told them they were not. I mean, yeah, I mean, he was an icon. And I remember when I got in the band, I joined the band, and I remember thinking, he might be really a real jerk. I didn't know. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Or he might, like, it might be crazy. Like I didn't know what he was going to ask of me, with the songs and how it was going to be. He was the coolest guy. I mean, so the whole time I played with Rob, he only questioned me twice about my decision or tempos or whatever. And I remember one of the times that we did Breaking the Law, like the very first time we ever did it. And we had never played it before, but because we didn't do it in rehearsal. It was just like, we don't need to play Breaking the Law. You guys know it or whatever.
Right.
And we went out in the first gig, and I did it the studio version, the tempo, which I think is like 186-ish. I still remember these. And then so after the gig, he comes over and he says, "Hey, Bobby," he says, "was that Breaking the Law a little slow?" And then I said, "Yeah, I do it like the studio." And he says, "I like the live version speed." And I said, and I had my metronome in my hand at the time for some reason, or I grabbed it real quick in the dressing room. And he goes, and I said, "Sing where you want it." And he starts singing, "There I was," and I'm tapping the beats on my little tap button stuff. And then I said, "Okay," and he's tapping about 188, 189. That's what he's singing. And I'm thinking, okay, Rob, then we got to tap, or 198. And then I went to the live version, and there it was, right around 198.
No shit.
The live version.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was like, so from now on, we did it that tempo. But he was like that, and I remember even early on, when we did Resurrection in the studio, I had a question with at the end of that song. It goes into triplet 16th notes on the kick. It goes from on the double chorus, and I remember asking him. I said, "Rob," and I didn't want to do something that sounded too much Painkiller-ish. I wanted to,
Right.
But maybe if he didn't want it or what, so I asked him. I said, "Rob, should I do this on the end on the double chorus?" And then I played like double kicks, with the triple 16th. And I said, and then he goes, "Well, what's the other option?" And I said, "Well, I could do straight 16th like the other chorus," and I played that or whatever. And he just looks at me and goes, "Do what you think's best." And I was like, "Okay." And that's the way he was the whole time. Playing with him, he was just like, he was respect the whole time. It was pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, clearly, man. You also mentioned throughout this interview talking about Sebastian Bach and playing with him, and he's a funny character. I don't know if many people hear it, but whenever I hear him on interviews or like his appearances on the Trailer Park Boys show, he's a funny dude. I was wondering, beyond just him as an amazing frontman and a killer singer, do you have any funny stories about him, or just funny interactions with him that you'd want to tell?
I mean, I could tell a crazy story. It'd probably take too long to tell it, but
Tell the abridged version.
my stories are way, way, way too long. But I'll try and tell a really fast version of this. It's close to Christmas time, and we're on the bus, and Brent, our guitar player with Sebastian, he decides he wants to decorate the whole bus in Christmas lighting and stockings and the whole thing. So on our days off, he goes to Walmart and then Walgreens or something and buys all this stuff, Christmas lights, and we have them all around the bus. And he had a little Christmas tree, stockings. He's got the glitter. You know how you put the glue and you put everybody's name and the glitter and stuff like that. And so he did that whole thing and had it all set up, and we all got back in the bus, after a day off at a hotel or whatever, and everybody's like, "Oh, this is cool, whatever." And Brent, man, that's awesome, And so at that time, it was like the weekend, and Sebastian the bus payment was due, and this bus driver was kind of I don't know if he was a jerk. He was just kind of a weird guy, and he used to be, at one time he was a singer, so he put stock in our stockings. He put his own CD of his Christmas songs. Oh,
God.
I don't want to hear the bus driver's Christmas songs. Anyway, singing Christmas songs. I mean, what do we want that for? Anyway, he was just kind of a little out, but it was the weekend, I remember, and the bus payment was due. And so they mailed it in, management, Sebastian mailed it in like Saturday or Sunday or something. And I remember it got to be Monday morning, and somebody at the bus company told them that the bus payment wasn't in. And the bus company called the driver and said, the bus payment isn't in. So the bus driver wakes us up at 7 in the morning. We're on the bus. We had just played the night before. Monday morning, and we're on the bus, and he's trying to wake up the tour manager in the back bunks, and I'm in the back bunk, not on opposite driver's side. Sebastian's on the driver's side in the middle bunk, just opposite of me. And then we're all kind of in that same area. And he's trying to wake this bus driver. He says, "I got to kick you off the bus." And he's telling the tour manager, and he says, "I got to kick you off the bus. I got to kick you off the bus. You didn't, the payment didn't come in," or whatever. And Sebastian, like, he hears this, and he starts freaking out. He's like, "What are you doing? You're waking us up in the middle of the night." It was like 7 or 8 in the morning. And Sebastian had just gone to bed. We had all just gone to bed.
Oh, my God.
And Sebastian, like, he's flipping out because this idiot bus driver is waking us up. And I understand if the bus payment or whatever, but they're threatening to kick us off the bus.
Right.
And Sebastian, he's so mad, he runs over to the front of the bus, and the bus driver is standing there and stuff, and Sebastian doesn't know what to do because he didn't want to hit the guy. He's a bus driver. You can't hit the bus driver or whatever.
Yeah.
So Sebastian runs over to the stocking that Brent put up with the bus driver's name, and he grabs the stocking, and he ripped it down. And luckily, I mean, it's crazy that the lighting didn't fall because he had lighting all around the bus, around the top. But he rips the stocking off, and then he opens the trash can. And he goes, "No Christmas for you!" And he throws that stocking in the trash can.
Oh, that's
and
hilarious.
I'm watching from my bunk, and I can't believe it. It's like the funniest thing. Well, the bus payment came in like an hour later because it was early in the morning, and we were on the East Coast, and the bus company or the banks are on the West Coast, and so the bus payment came in. So, whatever. But Sebastian was mad because of the bus driver waking us up.
Yeah.
And he had just gone to sleep. But I mean, there's a lot of stories, but that's just one that we joke about, that we always think is pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, he's a rock icon. I mean, Sebastian's one of those guys where, to me, he could never be anything else. Right. When I think about Sebastian, I mean, there's singers, there's great singers in the world. There's great, There's guys with great voices and everything, but Sebastian, he could never have been anything else but a rock star. I mean, it's pretty apparent when you see him and you know what he's about. So,
Right.
yeah, it's always a trip, though.
Wow, man. Well, man, Bobby, it was great talking to you. Thanks for the stories. Thanks for entertaining me with all the Spastic Ink questions and all of that good stuff. And you're somebody that I've wanted to talk to for a long time. So this was super cool hanging with you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was crazy. I just found your message in my Facebook messages somewhere. I don't know how long ago was it that you contacted me, but when I finally saw it or whatever, I made sure that wanted to talk to you a little bit about this stuff. So
right on.
Cool.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Yeah, and hopefully when we get back to some semblance of normalcy or the new normal or whatever it is where we can have shows, if you come back through New York, it'd be great to catch up with you in person.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Just let me know, and when I'm in your Brooklyn area, I'll hook you up.
Sounds awesome, man. Well, great talking to you. Good luck with the projects going forward and working on the house and all the other stuff, and make the most of it. And we'll catch up soon, my man.
Thanks so much, Jody. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and many thanks to Bobby for rapping. Really one of my favorite interviews, and just an awesome, insightful, and absurdly talented drummer that guy is. So stay tuned. I'll keep trying to crank them out. Catch you on the next one. Crash, bang, boom.